Todd Nash, President of Oregon Cattlemen's Association. I'm here today with Dave Bohnert. And David, you're out in Burns and with research there at the OSU. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Sure, Todd. I appreciate the opportunity. For those of you that don't know me, I'm David Bohnert. I'm director of the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center, and that's composed of the station that's down here in Burns, as well as the station that's in Northeast Oregon, Union. And those are the only two stations within the OSU's agricultural experiment station that are really focused on cattle production. And so that's primarily what we focus on. I've been with Oregon State since 1998, and I've been in the admin role at EOARC since 2004. My specialty is beef cattle nutrition and management. And the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center is a kind of a unique institution. It's composed of not only the Oregon State side on both extension and the Ag Experiment Station, but we have the USDA Agricultural Research Service, the USDA U.S. Forest Service, and we have an NGO, the Nature Conservancy, that we will really work with. And, you know, that relationship may not sound is one of those things that a lot of people would think when you look at beef production or rangeland management, but it's worked out really, really well. A lot of our objectives and work that we do just is very complementary. And I personally, have the biased viewpoint. I think we're stronger because of that relationship that we have.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of good products that come out of there, and we appreciate the partnership that we have with you, and look forward to doing more work into the future. But you've been great allies for the cattle industry. In your knowledge and passion for cattle, it shows in what you do. David, for the purpose of today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you've been doing here recently with virtual fencing. And there's a broad number of things that you've been doing with it, but do you want to describe, first of all, what the virtual fencing is and what that looks like?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say it verbally. But I'll throw it out there, and I'll put a plug in for OCA. I'm going to give a little bit of a talk at the annual meeting in January. So come and you'll see a little bit more information there. But it's not a new technology. It's actually been around and the theory of it has been around for a very long time. The thing that's changed recently is the technology has got to a point where it's actually feasible and applicable for a lot of producers. And more importantly, it's starting to get into that economic realm of where it can work. Now, how does it work? The current system that we have, the cows have a GPS collar. I think a lot of the stakeholders, a lot of your membership's probably seen a lot of the studies we've done where we can track cattle across the landscape. These collars allow us to do that as well, but they've also got stimulus worked into the collar. And that stimulus, there's an auditory stimulus as well as a electrical stimulus. And that's used in order to basically do behavioral modification. And it's not a massive shock. I mean, we're talking, it's not even really almost to the hot shot level. It's not that. It's like 800, I think, volts, if I'm right. I might be wrong there. Have to look up on the paper, but it's not an animal welfare issue. We've done work that's actually looked at that, because that's one of the first things that people come back, oh, that's inhumane to the animal. It's very transient. The effect on the animal is very short term. And lo and behold, they're actually halfway smart sometimes, contrary to what we think about, and they learn a little bit about what's there. Hence that audio cue. That audio cue is the first thing that happens. So when they start hearing the audio cue, if they keep going and it doesn't go off, they get the electrical stimulus. Pretty soon they learn audio cue, oh my God, I don't need to go further. And they stop, and that's the way it works. How they know and why it's called a virtual fence is we have a satellite system that works with those collars. So the satellite system determines the location of that collar. We have a communication tower then that communicates with the collar that then goes up to the cloud, and we can mess with it on our phone, or we can mess with it on a computer or an iPad. So we can manipulate where we want the fences where we want to keep cattle in or where we want to keep cattle out, because that's the really unique nature of the system. Also, it's a one-way gate. You know, we look at a traditional fence, for instance, it keeps cattle going in and it keeps cattle going out. We can do that with a virtual fence, but a lot of times what we want to do in a virtual fence is we want to keep them in, but if they come out, we want them to get back in, like if we manage it properly, like putting water in it, depending on our research objectives. So it uses satellite technology. It's using the increased battery technology we've got with lithium batteries. It's using the computer technology we have, solar power towers, the communication tower. And then we used a little ingenuity because they're not portable when you buy them, but we have some people that are pretty good about building things, and we put them on trailers and made them portable, because for the expense that's there, it makes a lot of sense for us to have a trailer that isn't locked in one spot, that we can move around the landscape. And it's worked out really, really well.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good explanation. And so the collars themselves going on to the cows, the battery life and the life expectancy of a collar and the cost of a collar, at least at this point, and where into the future do you see that going?
Yeah, that's a good question, Todd. And I can only speak to the one company that we use, and I'm not promoting any single company, but they were in the forefront with us. The company that we've been working with is called Vince. It was recently purchased by Merck Animal Health, and they've been really good to work with. Those collars you don't buy, you rent on an annual basis. And the price that we've been doing is about $40 a collar a year. And that does sound expensive when you look at it, but when you start looking at what most of our producers have probably priced fence lately by the mile, and you know, it's going to be $18, $20 plus $1,000 a mile. It makes a lot of sense, especially when we look at fires and we look at timeliness, that it fits in. The tower that we're talking about with the trailer is about 15 grand, and you do buy that, and that's yours. So you're looking at about 15,000 per a trailer in a tower. You're looking at about $40 a collar per year for that. The battery life aspect and you're not going to like my answer, but it depends. And the reason I say it depends on your research objective and the size of that enclosure or exclosure that you want to keep those cattle in, because the battery life is going to be dependent upon how frequently that collar's talking to the tower and the GPS, which we can modify, but that's kind of a small part of the battery load. The biggest part of it is the number of cues. The audio cue and the electrical cue is what pulls that battery life. So, like, for instance, we did a study trying to make a fuel break along a road. That's a fairly narrow strip, and we used water to keep the cattle in, and it worked good while there was good grass in there and is everywhere. But as soon as they grazed down on the sides of the road pretty good, and they could see without a fence, a physical fence being out there, that was a draw that pulled some of them out. But more importantly, it's one of those things we learned. We didn't anticipate this, but what we ended up seeing, cow-calf pairs, because the calves usually don't have collars because they're growing, and we don't want to cause that issue. Those calves don't get the stimulus that mom does, and they're like, "Mom, I'm going over here." Well, mom attacks that boundary, and finally, she usually breaks through. And that's a challenge that we're working around. It's not a knock on the technology. We just got to figure out how to use it right and to manage it in a way. And I think we're getting closer. We're learning more about the technology. It's not perfect. I'm not going to claim it's perfect and then it's going to work for everybody, but it's definitely a tool that, in the right application and for the right objective, land management objective, I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I would agree. It has tremendous potential. And I watched a short video that you put out, and that encouraged people to watch that as well. Maybe we can put that in a link here. But in that, you talk about anadromous fish, steelhead, Chinook salmon. they're the spotted owl in a lot of places for grazers, and infish as well, like bull trout. And we have some specific times when we have emergence of steelhead in June, and then we have uh, red making where the Chinook salmon are building their reds and spawning in August, and then you go into October and it's bull trout, and you have a short window of opportunity to graze some of these riparian areas, and then beyond that, if we could manage a riparian area and keep 80 or 90% of the cattle out of there, even if they are spawning at that time, maybe we could have some buy-in and have some better management tools to graze within those areas. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And we're actually going down that route right now, Todd. I've been working with some folks in Northeast Oregon with ODF&W, also Associated U.S. Fish, Grand Ronde Model Watershed, Forest Service, specifically the Starkey Experimental Forest. We're planning some stuff there. And we're also doing work on our Hall Ranch, the experiment station that's associated with the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center in Union. The aspect that I think is going to be important is we have to show some level of success, right? And we know it does work. We've got the first year done. We haven't analyzed it of the Hall Ranch study. Interestingly, in looking at the data, and in that the video you talked about, there's a heat map that shows cattle distribution, and the color means that's where the predominant cattle were. You can see it kept the cows out of the riparian area fairly well. What we did, that was a 2-month study, and I put collars on those calves just to track them, because that's a question we've had from that study I mentioned earlier about the calves leaving, and we wanted to check and see on how that goes. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is the calves like the riparian area too. I think that's what we're going to see. So what we're going to need to do is, if this technology is going to work, maybe it's just not a riparian fence. Maybe we concentrate on how we keep them in the uplands or graze certain areas of the riparian, and then use it with strategic range riding. It's not going to substitute for range riding, but we could use it in concert with that in order to get an acceptable level of management. And I think from the communications I've had with ODF&W, from the communication I've had with range cons with the Forest Service and the BLM, to be frank, they're super excited. Actually, I mean, colleague, Pete Schrader, he actually reached out to me today, and we're going to be meeting at the OCA meeting in January to talk about doing something on the East Moraine. So, and that'll probably be, being everything's already allocated, we'll probably do something in 2024. I'm pretty sure we can do that. So, I know that's not necessarily getting into what you're talking about, but it's just showing the application. And maybe it's not going to work everywhere. We need to know that. We need to know when it's going to work and set it up to be successful, because as you know, as well as I, if we don't answer all the questions, all it's going to take is somebody to use it and use it improperly. And it's going to make all the hard work we did look bad if we don't understand as much as we can. We'll never know everything, but as much as we can about the technology and how to use it effectively.
Well, I particularly like the idea that we would reduce the amount of impact that we'd have, because it's a very natural thing for ungulates to graze riparian areas. You can't tell me the buffalo and the elk and everything else, that's a natural place for them to join.
That's right.
If we can reduce the impact there substantially, that should be a win. And
yep. Well, and a calf, a 500 or 400, whatever time of year, you're depending on how good your genetics are, right? But those calves are not going to have the stream bank alteration potential that a cow is. When you're looking at how much they're sinking into the wet, and the size, the footprint that they have, the grazing on the woody shrub use, they're probably going to graze. So, we have the stubble. But to be honest, at least in our experience and with our forest allotments, stubble height hasn't been the big issue for us. It's been bank alteration has been the struggle that we've had to fight because of the way it is. And then, you know, shrub use. Sometimes shrub use is already pretty high before we go in because of elk and deer and the native ungulates that are out there. So yeah, what you're saying, it's extending our opportunity. It's decreasing with the same number of animals potentially, even if the calves go in there. It's decreasing that impact if we can at least keep the cows out.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that people don't really talk about very much, everybody wants to, not everybody, I certainly didn't, but a lot of people want to fence those riparian areas out with permanent fencing. Well, they're not foolproof either, but one of the impacts you have there is you have trailing up and down those, and that would alleviate that. The other thing, a good friend of mine that he just passed away, Wayne Cook, he said, you know, all these riparian fences, they're going to end up under a bridge by Portland one of these days. And that's true, you know, and Mother Nature has a way of taking them down. And if we don't have the manpower to maintain them, it can be ugly out there what takes place. And so I'm really excited about this project and seeing where it goes. If we can get the cost down to a point where it makes sense for producers to do it, I think we have an absolutely fantastic management tool for not only, you know, maybe not replacing range riding completely, and who would want to do that anyway? We didn't get into this to just to sit behind a desk and move our cattle with our iPhone. But anyway, David, I want to wrap this up here at some point, but do you have some closing thoughts on other possibilities that may be applied for this?
Yeah, I mean, and we have a group. I think you know Chad Boyd well, like I, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening probably know Chad. There's we're calling it the Precision Ag Technology Work Group that we've got through EOARC. Brian Endress up at Union, myself, Juliana Ranches, Kirk Davies, Chad Boyd, Rory O'Connor, Dustin Johnson, and we're all working on various aspects that we have. I'm kind of chairing the riparian side. Chad's been doing a lot of the fire break information. Juliana's been doing some animal welfare end of it. And what we're really seeing with this, like you said, it has application beyond just that riparian. It has application for our land management agencies. It has application potentially, for instance, on sagebrush ground. If you don't have a fence in core sage grouse habitat, you don't have to worry about strikes, right? You don't have to put up the flag. And I mean, it's going to be potentially animal or wildlife friendly fencing when we look at that. So it's all how we market it. It's all how we use it, set it up to be successful. We're pretty excited about it. I mean, this is just the third year that we've been working on these projects, and it's just ramped up astronomically. Not only us, there's lots of people working on virtual fence across the United States and across the world, actually. But it's going to be, to me, it's one of those things that comes around about once in a generation. It's like an ionophore. You know, when they first came out, they changed the way we fed cattle. I think virtual fence is going to change the way we manage cattle, especially in extensive landscapes. I had somebody call me, and I'll try to do it quick. It was a dairyman on the west side, called me, and he's had like 300 acres that he grazes on. It's a grass-based dairy. He thought this virtual fence would work great. And I'm like, okay, it could. He's wanting to strip graze it and everything else. Economically, it's not going to work. I kind of walked him through. He's got to do it himself. But he can probably use traditional electric fence in a way that's going to be much more economical. It's not as cool, maybe, but it's not going to be economical for him. For us that have a 26,000 or a 40,000 or 100,000 acre allotment that we have to work with, the BLM or Forest Service or whoever, this technology allows us to manage it strategically around water, strategically around available fuel, without doing that fencing that you're talking about, and keeping it safe. So I think this is a game changer for our industry and for land management moving forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's pretty exciting. I appreciate all the work you guys are doing on it, and the people that you mentioned there, Chad and Juliana and others, they're really outstanding, top notch. and we couldn't be served better. So David, I really appreciate you getting on here today, and you have a good Christmas if I don't see you beforehand, and we'll see you in January.
Perfect. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. Hope to see everybody at OCA in Pendleton.